Delighted to welcome Paolo Mangiafico, who is the coordinator of scholarly communications technology at Duke University, who will talk about his experience implementing a research information management infrastructure in support of Duke University faculty, and particularly how Duke's dedication to serving the needs of researchers has ensured project success. I anticipate that Paolo will speak for about 40 minutes, which should provide us with plenty of time to take for questions at the end of this 1-hour session. So Paolo, please take it away.
Okay, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hi, this is Paolo Mangiafico at Duke Libraries, and just wanted to thank Rebecca and Marilee for inviting me to do this and for setting this up, and also for all of you who are taking the time to join us today. So before I get started, I just wanted to mention a little bit about Duke University for those who may not know about it. I know we have a lot of international folks online. So Duke is in Durham, North Carolina, which is in the southeastern United States. We're a private university and one of 3 major research universities in our region, along with the University of North Carolina and North Carolina State University. And together, the 3 of these form the basis of our region's nickname, which is the Research Triangle. And they've become a kind of magnet for growing technology and biomedical industries in particular. Duke is usually considered to be one of the top universities in the United States, but many of you might know it best for our basketball team. We have about 15,000 students, about 4,000 faculty, and about 37,000 employees, many of whom are affiliated with a regional network of hospitals and medical research facilities. So this photo that you're seeing here is part of the library where I work. So to start our conversation about research information management at Duke, I thought we could start by looking at where we are now and then work backwards to talk a bit about how we got here and what we've learned along the way. First, I wanted to talk a little bit about the big picture of what we're doing and why we're doing it. Research information management means different things to different people, as Rebecca mentioned earlier. Most people usually think of researcher profiles or institutional reporting and analytics processes or ways to count and judge that elusive thing called productivity. In all of these things, it is all those things, but at Duke, at least so far, we've been thinking about it in a broader way. We're primarily thinking about it as a way of understanding the complexity and richness of our community and of sharing this richness with the broadest possible audiences. One of Duke's key strategic goals is knowledge in the service of society, and our planning for this project starts from looking at it through this lens. Any university is, by definition, going to be immensely multifaceted, and programs like this can provide a kind of synoptic view of the many and varied contributions of our community, helping members of the community find each other for collaboration or new research or teaching opportunities, and helping the general public find experts and knowledge about all the topics our researchers and teachers work on. And I work in Duke Libraries, and for us, there's another angle, too. For many years now, we've been seeing a growing shift in emphasis in research libraries from focusing primarily on providing local access to research produced elsewhere and towards a greater focus on providing global access to research produced by our own community. Bork and Dempsey from OCLC and others have been talking about this for a long time, and we've seen big steps towards making this a reality in the ways libraries have put greater focus on open access programs, publishing, data management, and other efforts that help researchers in their local community share their works widely, archive them for the long term, and track how they're being used. In Duke Libraries, our primary reason for being involved in the university's research information management program has been to support this goal. Excuse me. But I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, so let's move on to looking at how the program works, and then you'll start to see some of the things I've already talked about as we go. So if you search for a Duke professor, you're likely to land at a page that looks like this. This is a profile in our Scholars at Duke system. By default, every faculty member at Duke gets one of these within a couple of days of being hired. Academic staff and graduate students can get them too, but only through request through their department. The technology behind this is Vivo, an open source system originally developed at Cornell and now used by over 100 research organizations, with ongoing development under the Space Foundation in partnership with the institutions who are using it. We'll talk a little bit more about the technology behind this later on. So the top part of the profile page, this is what the public sees, begins with a brief biographical statement, photo, information about the professor's various appointments. As you scroll down the page, you see lots of information about this professor and his work. There's contact information, links he's added about to other sites about him, and his education and training. Scrolling down further, you'll see some recent items from the news media that have mentioned him or his work. A list of subject headings of topics he does research on, which on this screen are truncated, just to fit. And you might note that each of the subject headings here and the news stories are also links. So if you click on a subject term, it will take you to a page that shows you all the other researchers at Duke who are working on that same topic and all the other publications by Duke authors that also match that topic. And same with the news stories. If you click on the news story title, it will take you to the full text of the actual story itself. There's information on this professor's awards and honors, professional activities, and areas of global scholarship as you scroll further down. The professional activities can include things like presentations and appearances, as you see here, or there are categories like service to the profession, which can be things like editorships of journals or leadership positions in scholarly societies. And there's another category called service to the institution, which is things like being on university committees or being a chair of a department or things like that. The global scholarship section can include locations where the researcher has particular expertise, teaches about, or where he or she is conducting research. So it's easy to find, for example, everybody at Duke who has expertise on Haiti, whether it's about Haitian history or literature, or they're working on medical issues there or environmental issues, or whatever research members of the Duke community are doing that's related to Haiti. And so not shown here, but the global office at Duke also has a map you can click on where you can go through, and it's pulling data from this system about who's working or teaching about different areas, geographic areas. As you keep scrolling down and tipping open each of the sections by clicking on its heading, you reach publications. So here you see the professor's books and book sections. And as you scroll further down, you get to his journal articles, reports, scholarly editions, and other kinds of publications would appear here in that section. And you might notice on this screen that next to some of the citations are buttons that say full text or open access copy or link to item. And each of those will take you to a version of that publication, not just the metadata, but the publication itself. If you click on the publication's title, you'll get to a page with more information about it, including a little more detail about each of those links. So the green button that you saw on the previous screen that said full text is where we have a digital object identifier, which links to the published version of the journal. The blue button that says open access copy links to a version of the article that's been deposited in Duke's open access repository, which makes it easy for someone who doesn't have access to the journal website to still be able to read the work while still indicating that it's a secondary copy and you should cite the original. The third kind of link, which is not shown on this screen, is more generic. It can be any link supplied by the author or found in the article metadata. Often this is a PubMed link or a link to a different repository like Archive or SSRN or something like that. Or for books, it could be a link to the publisher's website or the Amazon page where someone could buy a copy of the book. And one other thing to note before we leave this page is that the journal name is also a link here. Clicking on it will show you all the other articles by Duke researchers that were published in that same journal. So in the Vivo system, each one of these things becomes a kind of node in the semantic web, and so all the other things that are connected to it, you can kind of follow that thread through here. And if any of the co-authors were also at Duke, their names would also be linked for their profiles, so you can branch out and learn more about this professor's Duke collaborators. So returning to the profile page, the last two sections show recent grants this professor has received and courses he's taught recently. If you had searched for his name in Google, you might have landed on this page, which is his profile on the website of the school he's affiliated with, Nicholas School of the Environment. But he didn't have to build this separately. The website is drawing data from scholars at Duke. So as long as he keeps his data up to date in the university system, it will also be current in his school system and his department's website or any other place where he has profile information. Almost all the schools and departments at Duke now populate their faculty profiles from the central Scholars at Duke system. And this both creates consistency and saves a lot of work for many distributed webmasters and the faculty themselves who don't need to edit this information in multiple places. So if Professor Newell had also had a personal or lab website or a blog or some other place that he wanted to have his profile information displayed, you could easily add a bit of code that would draw his Scholars at Duke information in real time into the other website. So this is a view of the widget functionality that we built into the system, which is only visible after you've logged in. So you wouldn't be able to see this, but a Duke faculty member would. You can select which information you want, publications or grants or courses or whatever, some parameters of how much of it you want to display, how you want it displayed, and then the system will give you a little piece of embed code that you see there at the bottom that you can drop into any other website. So this was an add-on to Vivo that was developed here at Duke, and it's been made open source. So if your institution is also using Vivo, you can easily implement this too. So how does all this information get into the central profile in Scholars at Duke? Most of it is pulled from systems of record like the campus directory, the faculty appointment system, or the course system or grant system. And to edit any of the records that come from these sources, you have to go to the original source rather than editing them here. This helps keep the data consistent across all university systems and avoids the need to re-enter and update the same data in multiple places. Other things are edited directly in Scholars at Duke. You can see some examples of both of those here. So the elements with a little I next to them pop up a little window that tells you how to get that information changed, as you can see near the top here. And the elements with a little pencil icon or a little plus sign next to them mean you can edit them here. When you click on the pencil or the plus sign, you'll see an editing interface. A few other things to note on this screen. You can customize your profile URL. By default, it's set up to match your email alias, which is typically first name dot last name, but you can also change it to something else if you'd like. The goal here is to make it appealing to the researcher to put on a business card or in their CV or in their email signature, and it's designed to be clear and human readable and easy to remember. And you can also generate reports from here, export data to paste into a CV or some other document, or assign delegates who can edit your profile on your behalf. And if you want, you can hide particular items or entire sections in case there are aspects of your work that you prefer not to be shown on your public profile. And from this screen, you can also trigger an immediate refresh of the data from the source system, where you see those little arrows in a circle like next to the recent courses or selected grants. Otherwise, it typically automatically updates nightly. And finally, and this is where the library comes in, this is the section with publications. So to edit those, you go to a different system called Elements, which is a commercial system we're licensing from a UK company called Symplectic, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. You can see here, so we're still in the Scholars at Duke Vivo profile editing interface. It shows that Professor Newell has 6 pending publications. So what that means is Elements has the ability to search a number of bibliographic databases, and it saves the metadata for publications that match search criteria set for each of our faculty. So publications that Elements thinks belong to this person but are not in his profile yet. And so it puts those in a pending category, and then it alerts the researcher that there are some things that you may need to go in and approve if you want them to appear on your profile. And then the researcher can log into Elements and either confirm or reject those publications that have been found or add additional ones, and then those get displayed in his public profile. Excuse me. So here's what the opening screen of Elements looks like. So on the previous screen, when you click on that Manage Publications button near the top, you'll come out of Vivo and go into Elements. So you can only get into this by logging in with Duke credentials, so you all won't be able to see this. But in this screenshot, you can see the publications it already knows for this professor, and that it's found 6 that he needs to check. It also prompts you to deposit publications that have been accepted for publication. Even if they're not out in the journal yet, you can start adding a record to it here and even uploading your paper for open access. And it alerts you to publications that you've already accepted that fall within the parameters of Duke's open access policy, which you can then go ahead and deposit for open access via Duke's repository and get the open access copy button that I showed earlier. On the detailed page for a given publication, again, this is still in Elements. It shows you more information about it, including how many citations various sources have for it, as well as all metrics like mentions in news sources, policy documents, syllabi, Wikipedia, or social media. There's a lot more I could show here in Elements, like the data sources we have available in search settings, but in the interest of time, I'll just show a couple more things here. So once a month, if Elements has found new publications for you, it will send you an email to let you know and invite you to come check and approve or decline them. So this is a sample message, which is why it has my name on it, but messages like this go out to faculty in a couple of our schools once a month, and we're getting ready to add it in for the other schools soon. So the template for these messages is customizable, and we've also added information about our open access policy with encouragement for authors to deposit and information about how to get help. And we can customize the language for different schools. For example, if they have different things they want to highlight or different language they think might resonate better with their community. We found these kinds of messages to be very effective. Each month after they go out, we have a huge spike in activity, both people logging in to update their profiles and to deposit publications for open access. So this process is typically set to run on the 1st of each month, and even on January 1st, New Year's Day was a holiday, we had, I think, about 800 messages go out, and we had hundreds of people logging in within an hour on the morning on New Year's Day. So people are checking their email, and they're clicking on the links, and they're doing things, and we see lots of profiles being updated and lots of new things being deposited in our repository every time we send out a batch of these messages. So one last thing to show in Elements for now. At the point where the author is uploading a file to our repository to make it open access, Elements looks up the journal policy in the Sherpa Romeo database and informs the author about what the typical policy is for that journal regarding self-archiving for open access. You can see an example of one of those here. So next to that, there's also a tab where we can provide information about university policy. So we give the author all the information they need to make a decision about which version to upload for open access and when. So there's really a lot of useful information here right at the point of need. Elements walks the depositor through each of the necessary steps, and then once the file is uploaded and submitted, it's immediately deposited to Duke's open access repository, and a handle link from the repository is added to the article metadata. Maybe I'll skip back here so you can see that. Next to the citation, there's a little link that says Duke Open Access Repository, and that's a link that's going out to the item that was just deposited. And then the next time the Scholars at Duke profile refreshes the data from Elements' API, which is typically overnight, but as I showed earlier, you can trigger it immediately if you want to, the article will have the open access copy button adjacent to the citation, which I showed earlier. So it's a pretty seamless process. It's well integrated into the other things researchers are doing to maintain their public profile, and it makes it easy for a community to make open access deposit a normal part of their routine work. If anybody needs help with any of this, we have extensive information on a companion site called Scholarworks. Members of the Duke community can find information here about multiple ways they can make their work more accessible, preserve it for the future, and track how others are using it. We have information here on how to use Elements and Scholars at Duke, how and why to make your work open access, how to manage copyrights to your own work, and how to understand proper use of works copyrighted by others. There's information here about getting an ORCID, how to register it with Duke systems that it's connected to, how to monitor the impact of your work through traditional metrics and alt metrics, how to start your own open access journal, and that kind of thing. And there's information about how to contact me and my library colleagues for help. The site is maintained by the Office of Copyright and Scholarly Communication, which I'm a part of, but we've tried not to have the focus be on organizational units or particular tools. We've tried to make it goal-oriented and attuned to the perspectives and needs and incentives of our researcher community. We frame all of this as a way for members of our community to increase the reach and impact of their work. We provide examples of how this benefits them in meaningful ways by featuring stories from their colleagues. We're aiming to make clear that this is all about helping them get the rewards they're seeking to save them time and to help them be more effective at the work that they do. When we talk about depositing their work for open access, for example, we almost never use the term institutional repository, which has little resonance for most researchers. Instead, we say things like, make the full text of your publications findable from your own profile and in Google Scholar. And we remind them that this will make their work able to be read by anyone with an internet connection and not just those at institutions like ours who are privileged to subscribe to these journals. So that's a key component of everything we're doing with this project. The researchers themselves are the core, and we've set up the services and communications around them to focus on their needs and incentives. Of course, all of this does provide benefits to the institution. We now have a comprehensive expertise database that shows off the great work going on across the university, an archive of the work our researchers are producing. And we have data that can be used in many contexts and for lots of collateral purposes, some of which I'll talk a little bit more about in a little bit. But in a sense, these are just beneficial side effects that come along with meeting the needs of our faculty. It all starts with the faculty. If they don't see this as being useful to them and worth their time and energy, the whole thing falls apart. You could have the best system in the world, but if your researchers don't care, they won't engage with it, and your data will be incomplete and quickly out of date and useful for far fewer purposes. So how did we get here? This project started about 2010 with the confluence of two clusters of goals. For many years, there had been multiple databases of information about faculty used in different parts of the university for different purposes, but none were centrally maintained. So the provost initiated a project to combine and renovate these various systems and unlock a number of new potential purposes for them. Around the same time, Duke's Academic Council, which is our primary faculty governance group, adopted an open access policy. And this was something I was deeply involved in at the time, whereby faculty granted the university the right to make their scholarly articles openly available via a repository maintained by the library. One of the stipulations of adopting this policy was that participating in this should be made as convenient as possible for the faculty and shouldn't become yet another compliance burden they needed to deal with on top of their usual research and teaching work. We knew from having studied previous attempts at both faculty profile systems and institutional repositories at other systems at other universities, and earlier experience with our own repository, that it wasn't as simple as, if you build it, they will come. In particular, these two papers heavily influenced our way of thinking about how to go about implementing an open access repository service at Duke. We understood that the systems had to have a real value proposition for faculty. They needed to be seen by faculty as a service to them and not just something they were required to do. It needed to meet their incentives and their reward systems. We couldn't just set up a digital bucket and wait for faculty to fill it. Another idea that was compelling was the idea of negative click repositories, that they should save you clicks rather than cost them. So I first came across this in this post by Chris Rusbridge at the Digital Curation Center in the UK in 2008. And as we were planning for how to implement Duke's open access policy, it led me to think, could we have automated processes to discover and keep track of what faculty were publishing, draw in the metadata from authoritative bibliographic sources, and then ask faculty to react to a request rather than wait for them to be proactive about deposit. This would both help with outreach, reminding authors of something they could easily do, and save them time from having to enter the publications themselves. And from the library's perspective, we also knew that an open access process on its own was not going to have sufficient incentives to get faculty to participate. So we started thinking about how we could integrate open access deposit into other existing processes that faculty already were inclined to do and have a single service meet multiple personal and institutional goals at the same time. It was around this time that the planning was getting underway on the new faculty database, which came to be called Scholars at Duke. Excuse me. The library team that was working on implementing the open access policy in the repository joined forces with the team in the Provost's office and the Office of Information Technology who were working on the faculty database, and we aimed to have a single integrated system where the different parts would support each other and all of it would be easy to use and useful to faculty. We had a core set of goals that we decided we'd work toward. So first, to use authoritative sources of data wherever possible. Hand entering data into systems increases the likelihood of error, or at least inconsistency, and having to enter into multiple systems compounds that. So wherever possible, we've pulled data from existing systems of record using the new profile system as a hub rather than as a point of data entry. When changes need to be made to certain elements, users are directed to the system of record to make them there. This helps keep the data consistent across all Duke systems, and when it's updated in one place, the change is reflected in all the places that draw from it. It also means that the people who are experts in or have their own reasons for maintaining particular data are the ones taking care of it, resulting in higher quality data and more frequent updates. For example, the news story section that I showed earlier is populated by the university's Office of News and Communication, who, for their own reasons, keep a running database of places where Duke researchers are mentioned in the news. So since they were already doing that, it was a relatively simple process to integrate this work that they were already doing with the researcher profiles in Scholars at Duke. So a second goal is to provide as many uses for the collected data as possible. So to maximize the value of time spent in making sure this data is current and correct, we've aimed to make it easy to use the data not just in the central profile system, but also in many downstream ways: school, department, lab, and personal websites, reporting systems, visualization tools, and even third-party service layers via an open API. We developed the widget functionality I showed earlier and work with web developers and IT managers across campus to help them make use of the Scholars at Duke API to populate profile information in their own systems. And we work with campus units who want to integrate this data into their own reporting and analytical processes. In the future, we may make use of this data in the system to help understand not just how much and where our researchers are publishing, but also which works are most influential, most discussed, or most accessed, both within traditional academic citation contests and elsewhere. We might be able to use this information as part of a set of heuristics that could help the library with preservation decisions, or maybe even decisions about collection development or investments in different kinds of publishing models. First step, of course, is to make sure we have current, comprehensive, and accurate information, and that opens up the door to lots of other possibilities down the road. So provide positive feedback and instant gratification. Things like having alt metrics and citation counts directly in the system where you manage your publications gives people additional incentives to add their publications there. It's a nice boost to see where your work is being discussed and linked. Also, when you enter data, you can trigger an immediate refresh, as I showed earlier, of your public profile, so you can see the changes immediately. And when you deposit a publication for open access, a link appears in your profile right away. We still have more work we need to do on this one. We don't yet have a good way for people to see summary reports of their download stats from the repository, for example. And we'd like to provide that both to individuals and to the departments and schools. Make it a living system with ongoing improvements and support available close to home. So the system and associated services have been in constant development since we first launched them with faculty in 2013. We continue to improve the user experience and add new functionality and participate in the communities of other universities using these same systems to help them grow and improve. And we've developed a network of people across all academic departments who've become experts in using the various parts of the system. This way, faculty can consult someone they already know who's in their area for immediate help. More extensive support is also available via email, a ticket system, and in-person consultation and training. And then finally, be responsive to the needs of the faculty, their support teams, and university leadership. So this project is guided by a steering committee that's made up of faculty, deans, vice provosts, and leadership from IT and the university's News and Communications Office, as well as the library, and it meets regularly to review progress, provide feedback, and plan improvements. We also have a management team that's made up of various other stakeholders and groups that are implementing and supporting the systems: Provost's Office, the Office of Information Technology, the libraries, and the IT and communications staff from various schools. There are monthly meetings of a distributed support network we call Power Users, and regular training sessions held in various locations on campus. And in all of these forums, we seek feedback from the users of the systems, and we build what we're hearing into the next rounds of planning and development. So from a systems perspective, these are the main tools that we ended up using after evaluating many options in 2010, 2011, when we were first getting started on this project. So Vivo is what you see on the public-facing side. It was designed to be open. The code is open source. The API is open and semantic web-based. And at the time we were looking at it, there was a growing community around the system, and its trajectory for growth seemed good. It's currently a community-supported system under the DuraSpace Foundation. I believe there are over 100 institutions now that are using this. So we selected this as the core for Scholars at Duke, and that's what you saw in most of the screenshots when I demonstrated the profiles earlier. And then behind the scenes for publications is Elements, which is a system developed by a UK company called Symplectic, and it's a commercial product that we license from them. It's very strong on the faculty-facing workflow, and it has all the service-related things that we'd envisioned doing when we were thinking about that negative click repository idea, and how to meet researcher incentives to deposit your work and maintain a university profile. So as I mentioned earlier, It sends data entered here to Vivo for public display and other downstream uses. So even though access to Elements itself is limited to our user community, the data from it is open to anyone via the Vivo interface and API. We were the first US institution to begin using it, and it's now being used by many universities in the US and around the world. And it's also improved dramatically since we started using it, especially in response to needs expressed by universities to help implement open access policies like we've been doing. So we currently are only using it for publications and open access deposit, but it's capable of doing much more than that, and we just haven't implemented some of the other aspects of this yet. So we ended up with a fairly complex implementation model, as you can see from this crazy diagram from earlier in our planning process, when we were just trying to map out how these different pieces might connect together. Because the information that we wanted to collect and use for profiles in the open access process were stored in a variety of systems. So where you see Scholars at Duke in the middle there, that's Vivo, that's the hub. There are a number of inputs via other authoritative systems at Duke, like the HR and directory systems where you see Duke at work, a variety of bibliographic sources which flow into Elements, and then there are a number of outputs, including public web profiles, our DSpace repository, department and school websites, and the international Vivo network. So not shown here are inputs from the grants and courses system, the news office, and other bibliographic sources, and other things that I showed earlier because they weren't implemented yet or even envisioned yet at the time this diagram was made some years ago. So one of the positive aspects of pulling all this together was the deep collaborations that were established between multiple units across the university. The Vivo project is under the Vice Provost for Finance and Administration, with most of the technical work being done by the Central Office of Information Technology. University Human Resources is involved because of the personnel data. The Vice Provost for Research and his group is involved because of the connection to the grant system and the opportunity to use profile data collected here to look for collaboration and grant opportunities for research teams. The Office of News and Communication is involved because of their interest in showcasing Duke research, connecting journalists and the public with Duke experts. They track the news stories about Duke researchers and make the news links that you saw in the profiles earlier. The dean's offices and IT operations of each of our schools are deeply involved in all of this, both as suppliers and consumers of data being collected here. And the library has been at the center of all of this since the beginning, since we provide some of the core data, publications, through the element system, as well as providing critical expertise about bibliographic databases, metadata, ontologies, usability, open access, and research dissemination in general. And we've helped keep the focus on serving researchers first and focusing on their incentives and needs and planning. So while the reason the library got involved in this was very specific, the open access service mentioned earlier, I think we've benefited in lots of other ways by being integral to an important university-wide service and showing that we have a lot to contribute beyond what people traditionally think libraries are for. So while we're not the functional owners of this program, we've played a leadership role in its planning and implementation. So just wrapping up, I'll share some things that we learned along the way that might be helpful for others who are working on similar projects. Full engagement and complete participation are really difficult to get, and setting expectations that high will lead to disappointment. So while library and IT staff and administrative leadership may want to wrap up functional requirements and move quickly through implementation and on to some other project, the success of initiatives like this is almost entirely dependent on the participation of many people, many of whom will be faculty whose independence and academic freedom the university values. Faculty are busy, don't welcome additional burdens on their time or administrative mandates. So if you can show value, use will increase over time, and you have to be patient and let that play out. Build some visible successes in some areas with early adopters, and then these can be used as examples when engaging with other areas who may be less eager for change. Attempting to roll out a major new initiative to a very large and varied group of stakeholders all at once is likely to result in a lower level of service for any given stakeholder and result in bad first impressions that will be difficult to overcome later. Successful initiative like this will touch on many different areas of the university and require buy-in from the stakeholders in all those areas. Beginning the project as a collaboration between those areas where they all see benefits for their own operations and the partnership is essential. If the systems and processes are perceived only to be a library initiative or only to be an initiative of IT or of central administration, it'll be more difficult to get the necessary engagement, and therefore more difficult to implement and more difficult to sustain over time. Culture of libraries tends to be one of service and collaboration with researchers, faculty, and students on the academic goals of the university. And we're used to communicating with faculty on those terms, and in most cases having a good rapport with them. Other administrative units, especially IT units, may have a culture more focused on completing specific tasks and functional requirements and on compliance with mandates. And they may be less interested or less patient with or less apt at finessing the more nuanced communications and implementation process required when engaging faculty on something that cannot or should not be mandated. This can sometimes lead to friction or impatience or miscommunication, but ultimately all the collaborators have something critical to contribute, and their contributions will complement each other. We know from working with colleagues in the university's communications offices and from earlier experience that it's very difficult to reach faculty through broad communications. However, we had much better success through targeted efforts, reaching out to individual departments, presenting at standing faculty meetings, holding office hours in their spaces, working directly with research managers and support staff in distributed areas, and engaging one-on-one with individual faculty and department chairs. These kinds of things resulted in much deeper engagement with faculty. Communications targeted to individuals were also very effective. The customized email notifications that I showed earlier get a really good response. And then offering to go to someone's office or department meeting to work with them on their specific needs is always more welcome than a generic training session with a broadcast announcement. So these are going to be broad stroke observations, but in general, our experience was that the scientists mostly seem to accept participation in the university's profile and open access programs as just a new part of the scholarly process. Some may have been annoyed by the sense of this being yet another thing to do, but in general, most began using the new systems without much fuss, and where they had questions or concerns, they were really specific. Humanists, or at least the ones that we heard from, seemed more attuned to the potential impacts this might have on assessment, tenure, and promotion, how open access might affect university presses or their scholarly societies. And they tended to ask complex questions about these issues. They also seemed to be more concerned about the amount of time maintaining the university profiles would take, and they insisted on more assistance. They were bothered by the perception that profile and open access programs of the kind we were implementing were mostly designed for STEM fields, and that the kinds of scholarly works that were most important to them were not well supported by these systems and processes out of the box. So I guess my advice is be prepared to address these concerns with sympathy and to work hard to satisfy these diverse needs before they become an impediment to the successful implementation of a larger program. In communication about any of this, keep the focus on the faculty members' goals, not the libraries or the institutions, and definitely not on the tools or processes themselves, since most faculty don't care about that. For example, as I mentioned earlier, when we're talking with faculty about our open access policy, we almost never use the term institutional repository or the name of our repository system, which aren't really meaningful to them. We tell them that they can make their work available to anyone via their own profile. So when people Google them or terms in their article, they'll find the full text, and from there get to a citation that they can use. The repository may be where someone ends up as part of the process, but it should not necessarily be where they have to think to start. And for the library, it's important not to talk about this or even think about this like it's about collection development. I often hear librarians talking about filling up the repository or building the repository collection or things like that, as if that's an end in itself. And I think that both affects the way we implement open access programs and the way they get perceived by the key stakeholders, the researchers, and not in a good way. So we need to remember that the open access policy and the repository and profile system and processes like that are means to an end. And the real goals are to make the work of our researchers more widely available, to help put knowledge in the service of society, to help researchers build their own reputations and useful collaborations, to help build the university's reputation, to understand the work being done in all parts of the university, to archive copies of scholarship for the future, to build a base of open materials that can be used for many purposes, including machine analysis, and probably lots of other things. So in supporting all of these goals, we need to keep in mind what our stakeholders' goals are and continually work to meet them. Faculty participation is key for such systems to succeed, and it's important for faculty to feel like they have a stake in their profiles and the processes that build them and are benefiting individually from having them and spending time on curating them. Meeting their needs and incentives should be the primary goal, and if you do it right, then meeting the libraries and universities' goals will follow naturally as a kind of beneficial side effect. So the library's ethos has always been to keep a focus on helping the researcher meet their goals, and by entering collaborations with other units on campus whose focus is on meeting institutional administrative needs, the combination of these areas of expertise and operating models can go a long way towards creating successful research and information management programs. So on that note, I'll conclude with some photos of the core teams, the people who are working on these projects at Duke. So in the bottom right corner in the group photo, you see the Scholars at Duke team, which is based in the Provost's office and the OIT, the Office of Information Technology. And the three other pictures are the team in the library that have been working on this, on elements in the repository. So none of the things that I've shown you would have been possible without the people shown here and many others who've contributed to it in lots of ways. So that's my last slide, and I'll just stop there. And I think Rebecca is going to arrange the questions.
Great. I think you can hear me now. So I've been looking at some of the questions, and I'm going to go back and folks keep asking questions as you have. We have about 15 minutes for these. The ones that sort of came out in the last 60 seconds, Paolo, relate to your comments on open access. So we had a couple related. Well, one question is, how important do you think that the open access policy was for driving this and make this successful?
Well, speaking from the perspective of the library, I think that was one of the main reasons that we're involved at all in this. I mean, I think other reasons have emerged over time, but that was the motivator for us to be working on this in the first place. So it was very important to us. You know, I don't think a priori it's very important to faculty. It's not something that they've expressed a need for, but once it's built into something that they need to use for other reasons, they are doing it.
Okay, so I had another question about how many full-text articles are being deposited, and do you have sort of any metrics related to that, numbers per month, number of authors who are doing this, and can you also maybe talk about some of your goals in this regard?
Yeah, so we do see things that are getting deposited, and you know, obviously we can count what's there. We can tell how many people, you know, proportion of eligible publications in different departments and things like that have been deposited, so we are monitoring that. We haven't yet set any specific goals. That's one of the things I think we're going to do this year and set some goals for growth at certain percentages and that kind of thing. I think one of the things we want to keep in mind, though, is that kind of circling back to the means versus ends thing, that depositing for open access is one way that authors can make their work open access. It's the way that the library happens to manage, so it's something that we put a lot of focus on, and it creates options for our researchers. But we also do a lot of work working with faculty to help them publish in open access journals or to get the rights back on their previous publications so they can make things more widely available or that kind of thing. So I think when we're trying to assess the success of an open access program overall, or the kind of inside out type of orientation that talked about earlier in the slides, there are a lot of pieces that go into that, some of which are intangible in ways that we aren't really counting or can't count how many people have renegotiated their publication contract because they are now aware that they can do that, or that what they should ask for and that kind of thing that will make their work open in some other way that we'll never see.
Okay, we had a couple related questions about resources. So if you go back to your penultimate slide, I think folks would like some clarification about the number of FTE and the staff involved, and for you to talk a bit about how much the library does. And one specific question was, who creates the profile pages and who does that maintenance?
Okay, so I'll start with that one first. The profile pages get created automatically for people just when they get a record in the university human resources system. So when someone has faculty status, within a day or two, they will already have a profile that will include all the information the university knows about them in those various other systems of record. So at the beginning, it will just be basically directory information, and their title and that kind of thing. The other changes to that along the way can come from a variety of places. So we encourage the researchers themselves to check their profiles and update and curate. We also make it possible for them to assign delegates, so they can assign an assistant or somebody in their department to work on their profile for them. We have assistants available from the library and from the Scholars at Duke team who will work with people if they ask for help. So we're not saying to everybody, send your CVs and we'll type everything in for you. But if someone says, I have a lot of publications and I'm having a hard time doing this, we will help them, on a case-by-case basis to update their profiles. But in general, this is something that we've wanted the researchers themselves to take care of their own profiles, because that way they'll care about them. If they think that someone else is going to do this for me and I don't need to care, they won't care, and I think that's going to lead to things being out of date more quickly and just not being that useful.
And I assume when someone leaves campus, their profile is taken down.
That's right, yeah. So it's connected, to their appointment as a faculty member at Duke.
Okay, so one of the first questions we also got was related to how ORCID is part of the integration here and how are faculty responding to that?
So we don't have ORCID directly integrated with Scholars at Duke yet. It is possible, so Elements is linked to ORCID, and if someone knows their ORCID, they can grant Elements the ability to connect to their ORCID and pull down data. So if publications are in your ORCID profile, it will pull them into your Elements profile, and they will appear in your Scholars at Duke profile. So that's functioning, but that's not automatic. You have to grant that permission on an individual basis to your ORCID. We have also integrated ORCID into our campus directory system. So again, you have to authorize that as an individual. We can't do that for you, but you can connect your ORCID to your Duke identity. So then any system at Duke that knows your Duke identity can match it with your ORCID. And so we're hoping, and we need to do more kind of publicity and outreach about this to raise awareness of these options, so that at some point we'll have enough of those in the Duke systems that groups like the Grants Office or other things can start using ORCIDs as identifiers to match people to different outputs and opportunities.
Okay, great. We had another question asking, did you use library authority data, and were there any new or supportive uses for that data in this project here?
Yes and no. So yes, in the sense that most of the publications data that we're getting is coming from authoritative sources already, where that's already been done. So we're getting things like keywords and titles and journal names and things like that are matched to authorities. There's also the possibility for researchers to enter subject terms about themselves more generally, not just about their publications, and that has been tied to LC subject headings and MESH and one other authority, which I'm not remembering right now. So that work was done. The identities themselves, like of people, are connected in, we have ORCIDs connected here, but also Scopus IDs or researcher IDs, and you can connect those things, and where we have people working with faculty, we will help them to find those IDs and connect them into these systems. And we're hoping eventually to have all these, ORCID be the way that the connective tissue between all of these things, but I think we still have some ways to go on that.
Someone also asked, what have you found to be the best sources for metadata harvesting?
It varies by discipline, yeah. So some of them have the same publication will find it in 5 different sources, and sometimes we'll like the PubMed one better, or the Scopus one better, or the archive one better, and sometimes it'll be different in different circumstances and different disciplines.
Do you have some additional data sources you're planning to add?
So partly this is related to the ones that are available through Elements, and they've made licensing arrangements with some of the various service providers, and we get that through our licensing the element software from Symplectic. And so one that recently became available is the MLA bibliography, the database, which we haven't implemented yet because the way to do searches in that is a little different from the way we have been doing in the past. So we're still working out how to do that. But we recently, our SSRN became available. MLA we're going to do, as I just said. And I'm trying to think of other ones that we've asked for that are in the queue, but every year there's a few more that become available through the element system.
Okay, and we also have had a couple questions related to non-STEM faculty. And I think that your response and concerns from humanities and arts and probably some social science faculty is not unexpected. How did you address some of those concerns?
Yeah, so there were extensive meetings with humanities faculty, chairs, deans to understand what was already kind of in the system out of the box and what wasn't there and needed to be done to help meet their needs. So the Scholars at Duke team built custom functionality in Vivo for things like performances and music and things like that, which existed in elements in a certain way, but without the same kind of flexibility that people were asking for. So that was something that was built directly into Vivo. There's an artistic works section there now that has a lot more flexibility that our faculty in humanities in particular specifically asked for. And also there was more staff made available to help faculty in humanities departments who wanted to enter these kinds of things into their profiles, and it was more labor intensive because we couldn't just pull them from bibliographic databases like we can for more traditional publications.
Okay, and a follow-up to that, how has been the reaction from the law school?
The law school has kind of been doing its own thing in a way that predates this system. So they've already had their own repository before the rest of the university had a repository. They had their own open access program, and they also had their own faculty profile system, which I believe is built in Drupal. And so that's the only school where we have data flowing in the other direction. So the librarians in the law school are maintaining profiles for their faculty, and then we get a nightly feed of the data they're putting into their system that then comes into Elements and then goes to Scholars at Duke. So law faculty don't actually do any of the things I just showed you, but they do end up with the same profiles because we're pulling data from their system rather than pushing data to their system.
Okay. So I think we've actually addressed most of the chat questions. I have one additional one, or at least one thing that I'd like for you to talk a little bit more about, and that's your sense of the reuse. Can you talk a little bit about how this information is being reused and saving time, say, on websites?
Yeah, so I think, I don't remember what the exact figure is that I heard from my colleagues in the Scholars at Duke project more generally, but I think it was something like 80 or 85% of the departmental websites on campus are now pulling data from Scholars at Duke. So that the data that's centrally maintained is now populating websites across campus. I know most or all of the schools are. So we now have this consistent set of data that's being maintained centrally. And as I showed, we have the ability for people to get a little code, widget code and things like that to put it in other places. I myself don't know how extensively that's being used, but I think it is being used, and we hear about people using it, and I know that there are people who are drawing on the API and that kind of thing. There are also occasionally other uses for it, like just in the past couple of weeks as part of the university's annual research computing symposium, there was a visualization contest that was based on the Scholars at Duke data set. And so a number of different researchers did projects and posters based on like what intelligence can we draw out of this open data set that we can get from the Scholars at Duke API, and there was a competition about that. But we'd like to see people using the data in more interesting ways that we haven't thought of, and there is an open API and the data is openly licensed, and we'd like to hear from people who you know, are saying, now you've got all this great data and it's nicely organized in this semantic web way. Let's put some layers on top of it, or extract some things and do things that the university didn't think of. And I think that's the kind of thing we would like to see and encourage.
Okay, well, we are almost to the top of the hour. Paolo, I want to thank you. I think we've all learned a great deal today. As a reminder, all of you who have attended will be receiving an email message later this week with a link to the recording, which we invite you to share and tweet about and let others in the community know about. And the slides are available, and please stay tuned for additional webinars in this series. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rebecca.